Welcome to Esther Session 5. We've made it through 4 weeks. I don't know if it's gone really slow or really fast myself. Some of both. I want to say that I almost did not wear my tiara tonight. It just, it didn't fit the mood. It's been a hard week. Anybody else? Okay. And besides that, when I was sitting here getting set up for this, I ducked my head, and under the glare of the harsh fluorescent lights, I could see my roots for what they really were. And what they really are is really gray and really grown out. And I don't see quick relief for that. I really hate to mess up a highlight job with a box color job, so I'm going to try to refrain so I don't have to hear my hairstylist go off on me. And I beg you to do the same. They also warn us to not cut our bangs. I did that at the beginning, so I'm not susceptible to that again. But some of you, I know, are thinking about it right now. The other thing under the harsh glare of the camera that's in my face that I noticed is that I have on no eye makeup at all. Never remembered to put it on today. Totally forgot. Been walking around without it. But hey, okay, the queen, she's not put together every day. It is okay some days to not be queenly. So I give you permission as well to be a hot mess. I don't know if Esther was ever a hot mess, but I bet she was. So, Session 5, we are actually going to finish the book of Esther tonight. This, however, is not the end of the study. We have one more week, and I'll explain that at the end, but you don't want to miss that. So we're going to start in chapter 8, and we're going to cover chapters 8, 9, and 10 tonight. If you're reading along, that's great. If you're not, I'm going to read every verse to you, so you won't miss anything. So a little bit of recap of last week. Last week was my favorite week. It is where all the real big climactic events happen. It is where there's big time reversal of fortune and divine intervention, and God is very, very obvious because you seriously could not make this stuff up yourself. You remember back at the beginning, I said it was sessions of The Bachelor, and now it was I don't know, some of the biggest, most dramatic soap operas that you can come up with. So I don't know, General Hospital, I haven't watched any in a really long time, but just outlandish stuff that happened last week. But the outcome of it is that Esther has exposed herself to the king as a Jew. She has told him that her life and the life of her people are threatened. She has exposed Haman as the perpetrator of this evil deed. The king walked outside because he was so angry. Now, they're at the second banquet that Esther had invited them to. When he comes back, Haman has fallen over Esther or is on his knees or something, but he's begging her to spare his life because he knows that the end is nigh. But what it looks like to the king is that he is assaulting Esther. And so his doom was sealed, and some trusty eunuch, a servant of Esther's, stepped up and said, "Oh, by the way, Mr. King, in case you didn't know, let me help you out here. Haman has built a gallows 75 feet tall in his own yard to hang Mordecai." And the king said, "Well, go hang Haman on it." Now, remember, a gallows, hanging on a gallows, is not what we think of from the Wild Wild West. It is impalement on a pole from the backside till it comes at your neck. Okay? And it doesn't necessarily kill you right off. And it's exactly what Haman deserved, frankly, even though it still sounds extremely gruesome. So that's where it ended, and that's where we're going to pick up tonight. So chapter 8 of Esther, verse 1. On that same day, King Xerxes gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Then Mordecai was brought before the king, for Esther had told the king how they were related. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's property. Then Esther went in again before the king, falling down at his feet and begging him with tears to stop the evil plot devised by Haman the Agagite against the Jews. And again the king held out the gold scepter to Esther, so she rose and stood before him. So it's a little unclear exactly when and where this happened. So we've had this banquet. Until I studied this, I always thought the banquets would be at night, but there are things that happen after the banquets that would make you understand they happened, maybe it was lunchtime, and there's still more daylight coming. So it looks like that it's still daylight, or it's early enough in the evening that people are awake. But it's sort of implied if Esther then went again before the king, that it's kind of a replay of the throne room scene. So has some time gone by and the king's gone back to the throne room and she goes there? It's not really easy to tell. Or are they still at her banquet site, but he carries that gold scepter around with him everywhere he goes, which seems a little inconvenient to me. Maybe he's got his own personal slave, the scepter slave, that just carries the scepter. I don't know. But one way or another, then she went again before the king, fell at his feet, begged him with tears to stop the plot. And he held out the scepter. So go back to a previous verse. I'm going to take you back to a previous verse. Esther 7, verse 3 through 4 says, Queen Esther replied. Now this is at the second banquet. If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases my king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. So in chapter 7, she has made her request, the whole purpose of her going before the king in the first place and inviting them to the two banquets. And the request is to spare her own life and the life of her people. But notice that there's no mention yet in chapter 8 of the king doing what she asked, at least not yet. He has not given her what she asked for yet. So she goes back to him again to ask for what she's really, really wanting. So verse 5, Esther said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor with him, and if he thinks this is right, and if I am pleasing to him, let there be a decree that reverses the orders of Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, who ordered that Jews throughout all the king's provinces should be destroyed. For how can I endure to see my people and my family slaughtered and destroyed? So first of all, notice all the deference she gives to him. It's really kind of, I don't know, awkward, weird, kind of makes us cringe a little bit. But remember that she had studied her man so that she could please him from the very beginning, when she first came to the palace. And then when she went to the king, she took Hegiai's advice and wore what he told her she should wear, or put on what jewelry he told her she should put on, and did what she thought would please the king. Notice that when she is deferential to him like this, that there are two aspects of him that she's addressing. She's first addressing his feelings for her, because she said, if I have found favor and if I am pleasing to you. And then she's addressing his approval of her plan that she needs, if it please you and if you think it is right. Notice also that she blames the whole thing on, quote, Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, who ordered the Jews throughout all the king's provinces should be destroyed. So there's no mention or the slightest implication at all that Xerxes the king has any responsibility, because she really didn't need him to get defensive at this moment. So she blames the whole thing on Haman, which is fine. She's not lying. But she really, really does leave any responsibility by Xerxes out of it. Verse 7, then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, I have given Esther the property of Haman, and he has been impaled on a pole because he tried to destroy the Jews. Okay, he's just going back over what's happened, maybe. But I looked up in Beth Moore's study of Esther that I did several years ago, and I think she's a pretty smart cookie, and she studies harder than I do. And I totally see her point about this. And she says, maybe he was feeling a little cranky about it, because it sounds like that phrase could be interpreted to mean something like, I already gave you his property, and I already had him impaled on a pole. What else do you want? I don't know. He's been pretty chipper with her. He's offered her 3 times half of his kingdom. He didn't disbelieve anything she said. He didn't question her when she said Haman is the author of this evil plot. He immediately was enraged. He immediately thought when he came back that Haman was trying to assault her. There were no questions. Haman was hauled off and executed. So, I don't know. But could be that that's kind of a little bit of, hey, like I did this and I did this and those were really pretty big things. Like, what else are you wanting now? And then he says in verse 8, now go ahead and send a message to the Jews in the king's name, telling them whatever you want, and seal it with the king's signet ring. But remember that whatever has already been written in the king's name and sealed with his signet ring can never be revoked. So going back again, the king has just been badly burned or just found out that he's been burned by the guy that he handed his signet ring to and gave the authorization to act in his name. And he's really quick right here to do the same thing with a guy he's known for far less time. He's just met Mordecai like a few minutes ago, maybe. And he's already ready to hand over his signet ring to Esther and Mordecai. And he says, tell them whatever you want and seal it with my ring. But just remember this, whatever has already been set into a decree cannot be revoked. Meaning you've got to come up with another plan that goes around that decree somehow. And they do. But it's just interesting how fast he did that. So it could be that he trusts Esther so much, and thereby he trusts anybody that Esther trusts. And she trusts Mordecai, obviously, a whole lot. And that he wants to honor her by giving her this authority. That he truly wants her to have whatever she wants and asks for. All of those are a possibility. After all, he's offered her half his kingdom 3 times. But it could be kind of like what he did with Haman when Haman came in and said, there's this group of people, never said who, and the king never asked, who don't obey the king's laws. They're a detriment to your kingdom, and that was not true. And the king, and I want to have them gotten rid of. And the king goes, fine, do whatever you want. Here's my ring. And Haman went and did whatever he wanted. So it's a basic repeat of the same scenario, only with much nicer people, Esther and Mordecai. Verse 9, so on June 25th, the king's secretaries were summoned and a decree was written exactly as Mordecai dictated. It was sent to the Jews and to the highest officers, the governors, and the nobles of all the 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. And I, this last week, happened to see in a commentary when I was studying that this Pony Express system that he had would have taken about 3 months to get a message from Susa to the farthest reaches of that kingdom. So 3-month delivery of the mail. And the decree was written in the scripts and languages of all the people of the empire, including that of the Jews. The decree was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. Mordecai sent the dispatches by swift messengers who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king's service. So, do y'all realize that Xerxes, only his signet ring appears? He's not anywhere in the picture in the undertaking of that task to write those letters and send them off to all those provinces. Verse 11, the king's decree gave the Jews in every city authority to unite to defend their lives. So the previous decree said that they were going to be slaughtered, killed, annihilated, destroyed, and couldn't defend themselves. And that decree could not be gotten rid of. It was already in the books. And so they made a decree that said now they can defend themselves. And they were allowed to kill, slaughter, and annihilate anyone of any nationality or province who might attack them or their children and wives, and to take the property of their enemies. So if you remember in the first decree that Haman wrote, the people who were going to attack the Jews, who might have been working with these Jewish people, living next door to these Jewish people, their kids might have played together, they had no reason to be unhappy with them. But once Haman said, you can take their stuff, whoever you kill, it might have become a little more attractive of a proposition. So they've rewritten it pretty much exactly the same. You're allowed to kill, slaughter, and annihilate anyone who attacks you and your family, and to take their property. And the day chosen for this event throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes was March 7th of the next year. So March 7th of the next year is the date that Haman cast the lots, or the Purim, and picked already. They're going to do this on that same date because that's when they're going to be attacked. Notice that they're given the right to kill anyone who attacks them, but they are not given a free license to go out and murder anyone. They cannot go seek out people to kill and take their property. It's a self-defense position. Verse 13, a copy of this decree was to be issued as law in every province and proclaimed to all peoples, so that the Jews would be ready to take revenge on their enemies on the appointed day. So urged on by the king's command, which the king didn't write, Mordecai did, the messengers rode out swiftly on fast horses bred for the king's service, and the same decree was also proclaimed in the fortress of Susa. Then Mordecai left the king's presence. So this might be a little bit of a flashback. So like they're talking about what happened on the day, and then they talk about the day they wrote the letter that the king on the day had given him permission to do. And this is probably a little bit of flashback, like they jumped ahead and now they're going back to that day. So verse 15, then Mordecai left the king's presence wearing the royal robe of blue and white, the great crown of gold, and an outer cloak of fine linen and purple. So if you'll remember, this has been a heck of a day. And it opened up, it was the day of the second banquet. Haman had gone early to the palace. The king had been up all night listening to the boring reading of his chronicles and found out that he had never rewarded a guy named Mordecai who had saved him from being assassinated by sharing that he had overheard a plot. And so Haman messes it up for himself. When the king says, what should I do to reward someone? Haman thinks it's him. He comes out with this plan of put the king's own royal robe on him, get a horse that the king has ridden with the royal emblem, put him on the horse, lead him around in front of everybody, and oh yeah, you have to say something like, this is the man who the king wishes to honor. And go do this for Mordecai right now. And Haman, we don't really get good details there that, I want to know Haman's expression. I want to see the gagging that was going on and the, whiteness of his face when he lost all color, when he realized what he was fixing to have to do and what he got himself into. And I wanted to see like Mordecai's reaction when Haman walked up and said, put on the robe and get on the horse, and then had to lead him around and honor him like that. I want to know all those details, but we don't get much. And then Haman, I don't know, throws him off the horse or something, or leaves the horse with him, we don't really know, and goes home and is telling his wife and friends this horrible turn of events. And then he is now summoned to Esther's banquet that he was invited to the night before, where his plot is revealed. He is taken off and executed. Mordecai is called to the scene, and Esther has begged again for her life and the life of her people. That's one day, y'all, and the day's not over yet. Okay, one day. Things can change a lot in one day. So, best we can tell, the very morning of the occasion when it says Mordecai left the king's presence wearing the royal robe of blue and white, the great crown of gold, which wasn't mentioned in the previous thing, so I don't know if that's new or he's had that on all day, and an outer cloak of fine linen and purple. Best we can tell, that very morning, Mordecai was wearing sackcloth and ashes and wailing in the street. He couldn't even come inside the palace gate wearing mourning clothes. And remember when Esther heard 4 days ago that he was out there, and she didn't even know maybe if it was him, just a man's out there wearing mourning clothes. She tried to send clothes to him, and he rejected them. He kept on those mourning clothes. He wouldn't have gone home at night those 3 days that she had asked everybody to fast. He wouldn't have gone home and taken a bath and put on his jammies and slept and gotten back up and put on his sackcloth and ashes. He would have been wearing that for 4 days now, until this morning. Now, this is not in scripture. I'm speculating here, okay? But it seems to me that he would not have wanted to like disrobe in front of Haman and take off his sackcloth and ashes to put on the king's robe. So I'm thinking he might have his sackcloth on under the royal robes all day. I'm thinking that he's been riding a horse. And I know that when I used to ride horses, you got off the horse smelling like a horse. So he hadn't had a bath 4 days, and he smells like a horse. He would have had ashes on his skin. He would have had ashes in his hair. Basically, I don't think he probably looked very good when he was called into the king's presence. And you don't have time to say, let me take a shower, and then I'll be right with you. If the king calls you to his presence, you go to the king's presence. So basically, be ready. Stay ready. So, he's been called into the king's presence. He's wearing the king's own robe that it looks like he's had on all day, like Haman maybe didn't take it back from him. And we don't see the king, saying, hey, that's my robe. Give that back. You know? But we also don't see the king giving him a new robe. So that's the speculation he's wearing the same one. And the king did take back his signet ring from Haman. So I don't know if he snatched it off his finger on Haman's way out the door to the impalement. But he gives Mordecai the ring on top of the robe. And evidently there's a crown and a cloak that come from somewhere. Esther has appointed him to manage Haman's property. So if you remember, Haman had offered the king 375 tons of silver if he would just let him write this decree that he could have the Jews slaughtered. So I don't think 375 tons, I don't know how many zeros that is, of silver is all he had. I don't think for a minute he was going to give all his wealth. So I think he had much, much, much more. And he had a house, and he probably had land, and who knows what he had. And Esther owns it all now. And Haman is now Mordecai, is now the property manager of all of that. So, look how things have changed in a day for Mordecai. He's gone from sackcloth and ashes this morning to being honored by the king, to being called into the king's presence and acknowledged as Esther's uncle, and being given a lot of stuff and a lot of authority. Things can change in a day. So verse 15, and the people of Susa celebrated the new decree. So they've gone from mourning to dancing, literally, okay? They were dead people prematurely before, and now there's hope. It was hopeless, and now there's hope. Verse 16, the Jews were filled with joy and gladness and were honored everywhere. Now, this is kind of funny. So they probably got along with their Persian friends and neighbors before, and then the decree came out where the Persian friends and neighbors could kill them and take their property 11 months out. And so they probably all quit talking and, being friends and hanging out and all that, because now everybody was like, oh, I think you're my enemy, even though you used to be my friend. And now the Jews are filled with joy and gladness and are honored everywhere. Honored by who? Honored by everybody else that's not a Jew. So those people have gone, uh-oh, this isn't playing out like we thought it might. I was going to kill him and her and those couple of kids over there and take that fine house with the swimming pool. But now, what if they come for me? I better play nice and not get on his bad side. So they're honored everywhere. In every province and city, wherever the king's decree arrived, the Jews rejoiced and had a great celebration and declared a public festival and holiday. And many of the people of the land became Jews themselves, for they feared what the Jews might do to them. So not only are these people playing nice and honoring their Jewish neighbors, they are converting to the faith. So in New Testament times, or Baptist language, they got saved. Okay? So, y'all know how it is. People, and some of them us. are living their lives thinking they're the top dog. Everything's going fine, hunky-dory, don't need God. Everything's fine without him. I do see him on Christmas and Easter. I talk to him sometimes at the dinner table. It's a good life. And then something changes in a nanosecond. Haman was a top dog, and then Haman was impaled. And they saw that and thought, well, right-ro, wonder what could happen to me. So y'all know how it is. We've talked about it before. People don't need God so much when things are going fine. But let them not be going so fine, and people start feeling the need. And all that is to say, God doesn't mind letting the heat get cranked up sometimes to make us aware of our need for him. Coronavirus is hot. Y'all, hot. And if you don't know your need for him during this, it makes me a little scared. Scared. But he'll let us feel the heat. Chapter 9, moving right along. So on March the 7th, the 2 decrees of the king were put into effect. And on that day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but quite the opposite happened. It was the Jews who overpowered their enemies. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the king's provinces to attack anyone who tried to harm them. But no one could make a stand against them, for everyone was afraid of them. So, when this decree of Haman's was first put out there, the Jews had 11 months to dread what was coming. 11 months. That is psychological torture. Terrorism right there. This is what we're going to do. We're not just going to kill you, like nicely. We're going to slaughter, annihilate, and destroy you. Which sounds scarier than just a little killing. So, the script has been flipped, and the enemies have now had several months to dread what was coming. So, the Jews are now having several months for self-defense classes and karate training and jiu-jitsu and things like that, and fencing practice and trips to the gun range. I don't know, but I bet they're getting ready. I bet they're getting stocked up. I bet they're getting strong. I bet they're getting trained. And the enemies are watching them do it. So who's being psychologically tortured now? The script has been flipped. Remember, too, that we've talked about before, you know, Esther waited 3 days to go to the king, and then she invited him to dinner, and then she invited him to dinner again before she ever told him anything. And if she had gone ahead and told him at the first banquet, then that whole thing with Haman and Mordecai would have never happened. And on and on and on about God's timing and how we need to trust that he knows what he's doing because he sees the end from the beginning, and we do not. Verse 3, chapter 9, and all the nobles of the provinces, the highest officers, the governors, and the royal officials helped the Jews for fear of Mordecai. Now, these people are Persians. These are not Jewish people. And they jump really, really fast over to the Jew side because they don't know this Mordecai guy, and he's not predictable. You know, they knew Haman, and he was kind of predictable. Maybe they had buddied up to him and, you know, thought he liked them, and they were playing along, and now he is out. Not just out, but out. And this Mordecai guy's come on the scene out of nowhere. Haman had probably risen up to his position. Mordecai is like in a second. And so they helped the Jews for fear of Mordecai. So the Jews are now getting extra assistance from the highest officials in the land. Why? Verse 4, for Mordecai had been promoted in the king's palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces as he became more and more powerful. So Mordecai has basically been given Haman's position without rising to the position through the palace ranks. Now, Mordecai is now these people's boss. They thought he was going to be hanging today on a pole, impaled in Haman's yard, and he's now the prime minister. Verse 5, so the Jews went ahead on the appointed day and struck down their enemies with the sword. They killed and annihilated their enemies and did as they pleased with those who hated them. So, did as they pleased with those who hated them. Not too sure what this means, but the Jews, remember, had been given authority to defend themselves against those who attacked them. They had not been given authority to go murder anyone, like seek someone out to kill them for the fun of it. But particularly in that culture, hand-to-hand combat is not clean and pretty. It's brutal. And so I got to thinking about what it might look like. Now, I hate snakes. Nod your head if you do too. We are sisters, okay? Don't be giving me that, but that's a good snake. Don't kill it thing. Just keep that to yourself, okay? So I got to thinking about if I had to kill a snake and couldn't find someone to do it, okay? I've had to do it before. It's another story for another time. But I would do anything it took to get the sucker dead, okay? And I can see myself, out of all the adrenaline that would be flowing in my bloodstream, doing superhuman feats of strength, and you would think they were superhuman if you were observing me. And I think just like Samuel did back in that passage in 1 Samuel, I could hack that snake to pieces before the Lord, okay? And I think that that's what the Jews might have done when it says they did what they pleased with their enemies. That was culturally acceptable at the time in warfare. And just like I'm going to be sure that snake is dead, well and dead, like that head cannot join back to that body because there's not enough body there to join to, and then I'm going to give it a couple more hacks just because I hate snakes. It's possible that that's what doing what they please to their enemies might have looked like. Verse 6, in the fortress of Susa itself, the Jews killed 500 men. Notice that it doesn't say, and women and children. The original decree was kill the men, the women, and the children. This apparently leaves out the women and children. There's mercy shown there. They also killed, y'all watch this, I'm fixing to read these names and try to do my best. Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Poratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Parmeshta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vazatha. The 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. Okay, Haman had 10 sons, doesn't count daughters, 10 sons, and they killed them too. But they did not take any plunder. So the Jews had authority to take the belongings of those they killed, and they had every right to. I think it would be a just reward just because of the psychological torture they'd endured to get something out of this. I like that person's dining room suit, I'm taking it home. Or I'm moving in their house, it has a pool. But it wasn't about that for them. It was about defending themselves and their family and their race, and that's where their focus was. And they did not take any plunder. Verse 11, that very day when the king was informed of the number of people killed in the fortress of Susa, he called for Queen Esther. I think that's a little odd that they're not hanging out together that day, standing on the balcony, getting the military reports or whatever. Like, it doesn't seem like he was in the war room for that day. Somebody came and brought him the message, and she was wherever. But it sounds like she was, as we're going to see, pretty involved. But he called for her, and he said, the Jews have killed 500 men in the fortress of Susa alone, as well as Haman's 10 sons. If they have done that here, what has happened in the rest of the provinces? Basically, he's saying if there's 500 dead in Susa, there must be a lot of people dead in the whole kingdom. And then he says, but now, what more do you want? It will be granted to you. Tell me, and I will do it. So, again, it's kind of hard to read him. And I spent some time thinking about that. He's pretty unreadable anyway. You know, he seems to be the guy that when he was feeling nice and generous and whatever, he was your best friend and you were his. And he was impulsive enough that if he was in a bad mood and you walked in his throne room uninvited, you might lose your head. And you might have been his good friend before that. So he is very unpredictable. He is very up and down. So not sure if this was his way of encouraging her to keep the battle going, or if it was him just wanting to be sure she was satisfied. Verse 13, Esther responded, "If it please the king," she keeps saying that, "give the Jews in Susa permission to do again tomorrow as they have done today, and let the bodies of Haman's 10 sons be impaled on a pole." Ugh. Okay? Now, I just have to kind of wonder from a female perspective, would she have had Haman's 10 living sons impaled on a pole? Would she have been able to give that order herself and cause it to happen? These are Haman's 10 dead sons, that their bodies are going to be impaled on the pole as an example to everyone who sees. I just wonder. Now, also, if the Jews really did indeed operate in self-defense, this would mean that Haman's 10 sons weren't sought out, cowering in their closets, dragged out and killed. It would mean that they went out to attack Jews that day, if this thing really happened as the way it reads. So I just think that was dumb of them. Their daddy is impaled on a pole outside their front door, and they want to go out and attack Jews today? And he's rotten by now. I don't think anybody's probably taking him down. I think he's just decomposing with the vultures having a meal sometimes. I mean, it's really bad, y'all. And they want to go out and risk that themselves instead of just stay home, shelter in place. Nope. But Haman was kind of dumb, and they inherited some of that from Daddy Dearest. So, Tommy Tenney, who wrote the book called Hadassah, One Night with the King. I'm going to tell y'all next week some resources. That's a novel, but then he also wrote a book on Esther that is called Finding Favor with the King. And in that book, he says this: "Why were the bodies of Haman's 10 sons hung from the gallows? It was a cultural wartime equivalent of cutting the basketball nets off the goals, of waving the grudge trophy in front of the television cameras, and of publicly pulling down the statues of evil tyrants." So, made a little sense. It's just a victory thing. So, the Jewish girl seems to have grown up and taken charge and operating in the position she was given for such a time as this. Verse 14, "So the king agreed, and the decree was announced in Susa, and they impaled the bodies of Haman's 10 sons. Then the Jews at Susa gathered together on March the 8th, the next day, and killed 300 more men, and again they took no plunder." So the rest of the kingdom has a 1-day battle, and Susa has a 2-day battle. So I read some commentary that said, so did Esther just ask for this extra time to run up the score? So we down here who like Friday night football, we've been in games where the score got run up and we did the running up and we loved it. And we've been in games where the score got run up on us and we thought those other people were sorry people, even though we'd done it last week, somebody else maybe. So running up the score, yeah, I don't know that was her primary motive. I think her primary motive was to be sure she got the whole job done. So if there were 300 men killed on the second day, that was 300 more men that came out and attacked Jews. And they weren't dead on the first day. They needed to be taken care of, and it wasn't over. So kind of like where Saul did not take care of the Amalekites. He spared the king. The job didn't get done. That's the whole reason Haman even existed in this scenario, is because Saul did not do the whole job. And she wanted to be sure it was done and that they had complete victory. So I read a little quote that says, ancient history had already proved that the enemy you don't wipe out when you're strong will be back to attack you when you're weak. So kill the snake while you got the hoe in your hand. So in some commentary, the question was, do you think God thinks it's okay to run up the score, or does he think that's revengeful? And they had a reference here that I thought was interesting, so I followed it. And it's Joshua chapter 10, verse 12 through 14, and I'll read it to you. And it says, on the day that the Lord gave the Israelites victory over the Amorites, so the Israelites have been fighting these people for a while, and they're fighting them hard on this day, trying to win the thing. On this day, Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of all the people of Israel, and he said, "Let the sun stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still and the moon stayed in place until the nation of Israel had defeated its enemies. Is this event not recorded in the book of Jashar? The sun stayed in the middle of the sky, and it did not set as on a normal day. There has never been a day like this one before or since when the Lord answered such a prayer. Surely the Lord fought for Israel that day. So basically in Joshua, God stopped the sun from moving to give them a chance to run up the score. Looks like it was all right. Now, this whole situation too, is this another example of fulfillment of a particular prophetic curse that God himself gave? And this is just kind of interesting. If you go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, he is cursing Adam and Eve and the serpent in the garden. And he says to the serpent, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers, and he will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." Now, that's a little backward to me. Again, it's one place I would just make a little switch, because the enemy's got to strike my heel before I can crush his head. Okay? And I would have just put it in order like that. But anyway, you get it. So that particular verse, we know, refers to Satan, the serpent in the garden, becoming an enemy of God. And God's son Jesus would be born from the woman, and they would be hostile toward each other. And Satan would strike Jesus' heel, and that is crucifixion. And Jesus would crush his head, and that is resurrection. Nothing can live once the head is crushed. Okay? Now, Satan isn't dead yet, but he's already doomed. Resurrection doomed him. He's as good as dead. Now, in this scenario, there's enmity between Haman and his people against the Jews, the people of Jesus. He struck their heel by conniving to have the decree put out that would have them all slaughtered. But very quickly and very unexpectedly for him, his head is crushed by Esther. And then the heads of all his sons, and then the heads of all the people who followed him into death by trying to attack the Jews on these 2 days. Verse 16. Meanwhile, the other Jews throughout the king's provinces had gathered together to defend their lives. They gained relief from all their enemies, killing 75,000 of those who hated them. So that's the killing in all the kingdom. But they did not take any plunder. This was done throughout the province on March 7th, and on March 8th they rested, celebrating their victory with a day of feasting and gladness. The Jews at Susa killed their enemies on March 7th and again on March 8th, then rested on March 9th, making that their day of feasting and gladness. So to this day, rural Jews living in remote villages celebrate an annual festival and holiday on the appointed day in late winter, when they rejoice and send gifts of food to each other. Verse 20, Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to the Jews near and far throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes, calling on them to celebrate an annual festival on these 2 days. So they are setting a feast, a Jewish festival to be observed annually to commemorate this event. He told them to celebrate these days with feasting and gladness, and by giving gifts of food to each other and presents to the poor. This would commemorate a time when the Jews gained relief from their enemies, when their sorrow was turned into gladness and their mourning into joy. Now, sometime back when I was studying this, I found a reference to, and I know I saw it, but I can't find it now, that of all the feasts set in the Bible, there are 7 feasts that God set back in the early Old Testament for them to observe. And this is the only one that is, there are other festivals and feasts they have that are not in the Bible. This is the only one that is set to be an annual feast, celebration, festival in the Bible outside of the ones that God set himself. So when people want to say that Esther wasn't real, that she never lived, that this is just a story, they got a whole feast about her and what she did. That's biblical. 23, so the Jews accepted Mordecai's proposal and adopted this annual custom. Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted to crush and destroy them on the date determined by casting lots. The lots were called Purim, P-U-R-I-M. But when Esther came before the king, he issued a decree causing Haman's evil plot to backfire, and Haman and his sons were impaled on a sharpened pole. That is why this celebration is called Purim, because it is the ancient word for casting lots. So because of Mordecai's letter and because of what they experienced, the Jews throughout the realm agreed to inaugurate this tradition and to pass it on to their descendants and to all who became Jews. They declared that they would never fail to celebrate these 2 prescribed days at the appointed time each year. These days would be remembered and kept from generation to generation and celebrated by every family throughout the provinces and the cities of the empire. This festival of Purim would never cease to be celebrated among the Jews, nor would the memory of what happened ever die out among their descendants. Do y'all feel like they're repeating themselves a lot to tell about this festival? That, by darn, we're doing this every year. It's a big deal. So, like Hanukkah, the Feast of Purim is now more of a national holiday than a religious one. It starts with specific prayers and a reading of the book of Esther, what they call the Megillah. It also involves giving gifts of food to friends and charity to the poor and a big meal. So when the book of Esther is read, the audience joins in, they cheer whenever Mordecai's name is mentioned, and they boo and make noise and shout every time Haman's name is mentioned, to the point that you can't hear Haman's name being mentioned. Okay, so it gets really noisy. They also have these wooden noisemakers that you shake or rattle that are called groggers to help with drowning out his name. Okay, so they cheer for Mordecai's name, they make all kinds of noise to blot out Haman's name. These days there's usually a lot of alcohol, and it is said that one should drink until cursed is Haman sounds the same as blessed is Mordecai. Now, it's not commanded that you do that, it's just an option. But be drunk enough that if you hear cursed is Haman, it still sounds just like blessed is Mordecai. I thought it's pretty funny. One of the traditional foods eaten is a cookie. It's kind of shortbread. It's round, and then they fold 3 sides up so it makes a triangle, and in the middle is like some jam, like apricot jam or a poppy seed filling. And the first time I ever taught this, on the last evening, we watched the movie One Night with the Queen, and one of our study participants was a baker, and she made these cookies. They're called Hamantashen, but that means Haman's ears. So you can eat Haman's ears at the Purim feast. As many as you want, actually. So it says now, this was interesting, celebrating a deliverance has been extended to smaller communities or individual families. Jewish towns and families who experience miraculous deliverance from persecution have been known to enact their own annual celebration called a local Purim or a personal Purim. So it's even extended past the national celebration. Verse 29, then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote another letter putting the queen's full authority behind Mordecai's letter to establish the festival of Purim. Letters wishing peace and security were sent to the Jews through the 127 provinces of the Empire of Xerxes. These letters established the festival of Purim, an annual celebration of those days, at the appointed time, decreed by both Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther. The people decided to observe this festival just as they had decided for themselves and their descendants to establish the times of fasting and mourning. So the command of Esther confirmed the practices of Purim, and it was all written down in the records. Chapter 10 won't take long. It's like 3 verses, the whole chapter. Chapter 10, verse 1, King Xerxes imposed a tribute throughout his empire, even to the distant coastlands. So here's what that sounds like upon first reading. It sounds like, oh, the king got involved in the celebration and he imposed a tribute throughout the whole kingdom. Well, a tribute is a tax, okay? He wasn't giving it to them. He was taking money from them. It was mandatory and it was payable to him. Isn't that wild? That's how he's celebrated. He imposed a tax. Verse 2 says, his great achievements and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Media and Persia. And they don't even mention Esther right here. Like she's the whole central figure in the thing. But they talk about the greatness of the king and Mordecai. Verse 3, Mordecai the Jew became the prime minister with authority next to that of King Xerxes himself. He was very great among the Jews who held him in high esteem because he continued to work for the good of his people and to speak up for the welfare of all their descendants. The end. What do y'all think? Well, you can't talk to me. Nod your head if you liked it. I won't be offended if you didn't. But you kept coming back. So, there we have it. The end. It's all written down in King Xerxes' book. The really, really boring one that he had read to him one night when he couldn't sleep to try to get sleepy. Now, this week's handout is purple, violet, lavender, lilac, whatever you want to call it. And here's what I wrote on it. The book of Esther is full of change. Jewish girl to Persian queen, maiden to wife, Hadassah to Esther, Haman enraged at Mordecai to Haman honoring Mordecai, lives secured to lives threatened, fear of being executed in the throne room to enthusiastic welcome by the occupier of the throne, enemy dining at the queen's table to enemy impaled where he meant to impale the queen's loved one, Mordecai a lower official to Mordecai the prime minister, the Jewish people facing slaughter with no hope to the Jewish people able to self-defend with all hope. Lots and lots of reversals, unexpected reversals, and stuff that seriously, like I said, we couldn't make up. This stuff had to have happened. Nobody's that creative to have written a novel that comes out like this. And the reversals, I just don't see any way that they could have happened without the Lord's intervention and the providence of God. So this week's hashtag is perspective. Hashtag perspective is how you're going to find this particular post where I'm going to put the handout. And it says, the truth is, changes in life circumstances cause changes in perspective. Make this statement real for yourself today. My perspective affects my thinking. And what I choose to think about has everything to do with how I feel. If I do not choose to think about things the right way, my feelings will lead me to choices and actions that will take me the wrong way. Perspective is everything. So the question, I'm not sure which of these questions I'm going to put on the Facebook page, so you'll just have to find out. But the questions are, make an honest evaluation of your perspectives and write your true perspectives and don't pretty it up. So I probably won't put that one because y'all wouldn't be honest. Perspective about the pandemic, perspective about a personal stressor, and perspective about how God sees you. And then a time about faulty perspective and a time about when God changed your perspective when you were pretty solid in the other perspective before that. So hashtag perspective this week. So next week, we're not done. We're done with the book of Esther. There'll be some recap. I'm going to give you some resources if you want to study Esther even deeper. But we have one more thing that we want to cover that is going to very much tie into this. It is my other favorite thing to teach. And I say it's called the richest chapter in Scripture. And I believe it. And so I'll tell you about it next week. I'm not even going to give it away. Some of you will know when I said it's my other favorite thing to teach. But it's good, y'all. And it's been good for me for 27 or 8 years. And every time I study it, God gives me something new. Because Scripture is a living document. It is not just words on a page. So I hope you'll be back next week. I know we're all getting tired. I saw a few eyelids get heavy on my little boxes in front of me, but that's okay. So let me pray for us, and then I will see you next week. Father God, we just thank you again for letting us assemble together in a strange new way, but thank you for the technology that enables us to do so. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for how rich it is. Thank you for the fact that it is living, that it's not just words on a page, that you have fresh wisdom and insight every time we will open it up. And so, Father, I ask for more of that next week. I ask for that as these ladies study whatever they're studying this week. Father, I just thank you for each one of them, especially these ones that have come all this way, for their dedication to you and to your word. Father, again, we just pray about the condition of our nation and our world and our county. Father, I pray for these patients that are positive, Lord. I pray for the family that has lost a loved one to COVID-19. I pray, Lord, that you would put a spirit of unity in this situation, Father, that you would bind people together and not let people split apart. Father, that you would cause all of us to be instruments of healing and not instruments of divisiveness. And that's an easy trap to fall into, Lord, and we need your help. Now, Father, just go with us. Please bless and protect each one of these ladies and their households. Bring us back together next week. And thank you for all your love and care and kind attention to us. And we love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Good night, ladies.